That still looks like it's...
Yeah.
Okay. All right, well, what I'm going to do here is explain the narrative speech evaluation form so you'll know what you're being graded on. And we'll start at the top and just work our way down this sheet. And I will email the sheet to the folks that are not here so they can watch it and make sense out of it. Okay, the first thing here, it has to do with time. Well, let me explain the left-hand column first. You see the numbers there. I'm going to circle one of those numbers as you speak or when you get done, and that'll tell you how many points, and they'll total up to a possible 30 points out of your total score for the semester. Notice that time has twice as many points as any of the others, and that's because it's very important to learn how to stay within a time limit so you don't step on somebody else's presentation if there's other people involved in where you're at and so on. Even in the class, if they have a big class, it's real important that we don't run over. People will be here until 10:30 trying to get their speech in. So the time is very important. It picks up a big chunk of it. And notice it says over by and under by, so I'll get your time and grade you accordingly on that. And we talked about that night that I went over that syllabus with people who had spoken well beyond their time limit and really messed things up for other people. I'll probably be turning to see if I hear anybody coming in the door all night here. So.
Yes.
Okay, so here's the thing. Began after pause. Then I've got some phrases after it. Rushed into it, didn't set your feet, didn't look around the room, begun with okay. Those are things not to do. And it happens so often that instead of me writing that each time, I'm just going to underline anything that fits that. And it says or, and then there's a blank space. There might be something else that comes up, and I'll write that in. But these things that happen a lot, I'm going to just underline. And that's the way all the way through this. So I'm just going to explain that once, that how I'm doing it. So, but I'll give you some examples here. When you prepare, you can just leave that set. So I'm just coming up to give my speech tonight. And I come up here. Tonight I'm going to tell you about the time. No. Don't rush into it. You walk up here deliberately. When you get up to the podium, you'll lay your notes down on the podium. But don't get behind the podium and hang on to it and that sort of thing. Just lay your note down and then step just to the side where you can see your notes, but you're not hanging on to them and rattling them. And I'll get to that some here later too, but I'll just set it down and then set your feet under your shoulders like this. Don't stand like this and then you wind up kind of moving around a lot, and don't get your feet right together because then you've got a balance issue. So get them set underneath your shoulders. Now we had, at my other job, we had actually the chief of police come in one time and talk to us about how to set yourself if you're dealing with a client that might become violent. Because some of the folks that work with the mentally ill, they've got that occasionally comes up. Not that there's a huge amount of violence just because they're mentally ill, but it's something to come up once in a while. Now he said that the way to stand when you're dealing with a person like that is kind of 45-degree angle. And so that person's out here in front of you, and you stand like this, it's going to be hard for them just to give you a push and knock you over. So it's just another instance of where how you set your feet are important. And your feet at about a 45-degree angle too, so you got a kind of a stable deal. Well, here we're not worried about that getting pushed over, but we don't want to get is this sort of thing going on. And this and all the moving around. So get our feet under our shoulders. It doesn't mean we have to stand and not move our entire speech, but we shouldn't be moving around a lot either, and I come to that here in a bit, so I'll get back to that. But to get started, set your feet, and I'll talk about this later too, but bring your hands up, just get them up above your waist, and look around the room to make eye contact with everybody once, and then begin your speech. Don't start out with, okay, and then get going. Just know what memorize your first speech. That's the next part. Identifiable introduction, so you don't stumble over the first line, and you want to be sure to set the stage for your story. So memorize your first and last sentences. Don't memorize your whole speech, but know exactly what you're going to say first, and know exactly what you're going to say last, so you can start smoothly and end smoothly, and not just kind of wander around with it a little bit. So know exactly what you're going to say, and then give us set the stage for your story, and we'll know that from your written version that you're going to bring in or send me on an email. So Come up here with your with your idea, but don't rush into it. Just walk up slowly, set your notes down on the podium, get your feet under your shoulders, get your hands up so you can use them when it's time, and then begin with that memorized first sentence. Eye contact, and I mentioned that already, to spread it around the room to begin with. Then try to continue to spread it around the room. And this room is difficult. I find myself looking right down the pipe here a lot of times. And there'll be people spread out like this, but it's kind of doesn't smoothly lend itself to doing that. So you'll have to work at that a little bit. Now it's kind of okay in the first speech especially to get focused on someone that'll smile at you. And really all of you should be paying attention and smiling at the speaker and make them feel confident. Yeah, look puzzled if you don't understand something, and then they can maybe expand on it when they see that puzzled look on your face. But pay attention and don't start thinking about your children, what they might be doing at home and frowning. I wonder if they've tied up the babysitter yet. You know, the speaker takes that as disapproval for them. You know, so stay plugged into the speaker and help them. And then for the speaker themselves, don't try to get away with looking over the audience's head. You can tell that I'm doing that. So I'm, trying to pretend that I'm all alone here and there's no one looking at me. I look over their heads. The audience knows that. Don't get to looking at the floor, and don't get hung up on your notes. That's why I don't want you to use lots and lots of notes. You'll use enough to remind you to cover an area, but not all the details that you're going to say. And that way you won't get hung up on it. So, I'll be right here next to you to look at when you need to, but not right in your face all the time, so you kind of get caught on them. So eye contact. Oh, and ask me questions anytime as we go through this. That's the time to answer them best, so I'll answer them later too, but it's good to answer them right away as we go through, so go ahead and ask questions. So that's the eye contact I did. And as our next speech go on, then you should get better at making eye contact with everybody. And of course in a small class like this, it should be relatively easy. Stance and appearance. Already talked about not, I'll have the line here, didn't space your feet under your shoulders. So I'll underline that if you are standing like this, if you've got a cocked foot, one foot up like this. All those things lend yourself to a lot of unnecessary movement. So try to get stable. We want the audience to concentrate on your words, not on, oh, there they are dancing again, type of thing. Don't shuffle your feet or rock back and forth. And don't move too much. My first speech when I went back to college in my 40s, I rehearsed it on an old abandoned bridge down on the creek down there under Vermilion's Bluffs. And the bridge was abandoned. People go down there to sunbathe and stuff. And I'd go down there just on a nice afternoon, ride my bike down there and stuff. And so I ride my bike down there and I'm going to rehearse my speech, and I'm walking back and forth on the bridge like this, reading my speech and then saying, a few lines and that. Well, I came in to give my speech. Well, here I am, back and forth like this. And the audience is like they're watching a tennis game, back and forth, back and forth. So try to get yourself in the middle, when you move like it's sort of like a paragraph when you're writing says we're going on to another idea. So maybe you'll give the introduction part of your story, and then you kind of come to the next paragraph as you have written it out. Then that's the time to move. And that kind of it puts a pause into your speech and lets the audience kind of shift gears. So when you go from one idea to the next, we get into your informative speech, it'd be a main point maybe. Then you can move, but then set up again. And that's when that first speech that I gave my speech teacher then wrote on my evaluation form. It's okay to move, but stop, set up once in a while. And don't be like not Eddie Murphy, Chris Rock. He's back and forth all the time and everything, but he's a comedian, he's got a different deal going. Your dress, several things about that. Don't wear logos on your t-shirt, things that people can read or get into, especially the things with writings and stuff. If you get a real wrinkle in that writing and they can't make it out, they're going to be sitting there going, what's that say? What's that say? So don't distract your audience with things on your t-shirts. No exposed belly buttons. This time of year that probably won't be a problem. Maybe by spring it might get to be that. That's another distraction. People are looking to see if it's an innie or an outie. It's with some people it might be attractive, with others not so much. Don't go there. Just cover your midriff. Then don't stay behind the podium, because the next thing you know, you're doing this. You're moving around on the podium, you're laying on the podium, you're not using your hands because you got your hands gripping the podium. So don't get behind the podium and stay there. You can walk back there, especially when we get to the visual aid part, but I will put my laptop up on the podium so you still don't have to get behind it to operate the PowerPoint. You can hit and it's a simple thing to do. You hit B to blanket and hit a cursor to move it on to the next deal, and that's all you have to do. Don't chew gum. Every now and then I forget to take gum out of my mouth because I chew gum quite often. Then I got it up here in between my lip and my gum, and not a good thing. So leave the gum behind. So stance and appearance. Any questions so far?
No.
Okay. Pardon? Go ahead.
No, everything's looking good.
Now gestures. Remember I said at the very beginning, get your hands up above your waist, and then you don't have to concentrate on your gestures. They'll take care of themselves if you'll give them a chance. But if your hands are in your pockets, then, so now you're going to make a gesture, you're going to kind of shrug your shoulders a little bit or whatever instead of doing this. So don't worry about them, but put them your hands in a place where you can use them. If you got your hands clasped like this, same thing, you can do this sort of thing instead of freely moving your hands. If you're behind your back or in your pockets. If you have a habit of playing with jewelry, by the way, where there's twisting a ring when you're anxious a little bit, or you get a necklace and you start doing this, leave them off. Don't wear them up here because they'll be a natural thing to do. So just prepare yourself for that. I'm not going to get in my pockets. I'm not going to get behind my back. I'm not going to play with jewelry. I'll leave the jewelry behind. Maybe if you have a hard time with pockets, and it's not so true for women, of course, don't wear pockets to start with. Real easy for a man. I get my hand in my pockets and start rattling my keys and my change. And then that's noisy on top of everything else. So just get your hands up and free, and they'll take care of themselves. We went out to eat last night, and I ate a big pizza all by myself. It gave me a stomach ache, and you'll do that without even thinking about it. You don't have to, and most gestures don't illustrate like I just did there with the pizza or the rubbing of the stomach. They're just movements. And then for some cultures, like I say with the Italians, they talk with their hands a lot, and others not so expressive. And maybe the family we came out of used a lot of gestures when they talked, and others not so much. But it doesn't have to be wild and all that stuff. Dana Carvey, that used to be on Saturday Night Live, and he was one of the Wayne's World guys. He did a deal with the first George Bush, who apparently had some issues with gestures. So he wrote in his speeches gesture, like remember to gesture. So he'd be saying, be sure and use your hands and all that, and he looked at it and go, gesture. And you go like this, like he just made a movement out of the blue, even though he wasn't talking about anything or whatever. He'd look down and see gestures, you go. And of course that was, as comedy does, it overstates the case, but it was kind of obvious that he wasn't comfortable with his gestures. So just get your hands up there and don't worry about them, and they'll take care of themselves. Your voice, the volume, I got to underline here, too soft or too loud if that's the case. But this is such a small room, it's kind of almost, it's not impossible to talk too soft. People do, and I have trouble hearing a couple of you, Alexa, for when you have a soft voice. You might want to bring that up a little bit, when you're up here. No?
I don't have a soft voice, so I don't. I just talk soft when I'm talking about stupid things.
Okay. Well, that's true too. People, and if they get into a sensitive area or whatever, tend to talk softer. Adolescents talk softer because they hear better in the first place. They think they're talking loud enough. One of my students one time, we'll be doing peer evaluations, and I'll explain them the night of the speech, but on hers, she wrote as feedback to the speaker, you need to talk. She was a high school student that was in here taking the class. She wrote on her evaluation, you need to talk a little bit louder. There are older people in here too, remember. That would be me, and one of the students was like in their 50s too. So get your voice up so it's loud enough, and again, if the audience almost gives a cup their ear or whatever, like I'm not hearing you plainly, then lift it up a little bit. And also, along with the voice and the volume, is the rate of delivery. We can be full of adrenaline coming up here because we're giving that speech, and talk really fast. So that we'll rehearse our speech and we'll wind up being too short on our time because we talk so fast. In speech, it's actually, you sound more credible if you talk a little bit on the fast side. Like you know what you're going to say, you're not inventing what you're going to say as you go along. But don't be so fast that it's you can't pick anything out. As you rehearse your speech, you could fall into a sing-song kind of a pattern. I always have trouble illustrating that. Well, then we went to the store. Then we went back out to the car. Then we forgot something and had to go back into the store. And you fall into this set, rise, and fall rhythm because you rehearsed it so much. So try to talk naturally like you're telling it for the first time. Recently, I've seen some studies that have caused some doubt on this. You know, the and the ers and all that. And if it's really bad, people get to counting them. But a few ums and ers are really not bad. But if it's just 3 times a sentence all the way through your talk, then it's getting distracting. And the word like, not so bad. Probably most people have been out of high school for a few years, but every year down at Vermilion, when I was teaching down there, we'd have all these freshmen, 18 years old, and it was like, you know. And I was like, and then she was like, and then I went like, and you know, and it did, and then I'd wind up saying it, and because I heard it so much. So those are some things to be aware of with your voice. The smooth flow, you know, try to give us the information we need to know in a timely fashion. Don't get halfway through a talk and go, oh, by the way, did I mention he had a big dog? Because the dog is going to play an important part in it. We should know that he had that to start with. Don't pass around any handouts or pictures. They interrupt the flow. If you have handouts, put them down here on the table and then tell your audience, if you want a handout on this, you know, for instance, I advise you to call your congressman. His phone numbers and addresses, those are all right down at the end of the table. Take one with. And that does 2 things. It keeps people from studying your handout while you speak instead of listening to you. And it also saves a tree. If they're not really interested in calling their congressman or whatever, then they won't pick it up, and then you won't be wasted. They'll just take and throw it in the trash before they get out the door. So, again, the identifiable conclusion I said about memorizing the first and last lines of your presentation. That'll keep you from stumbling over it. You know exactly what you're going to say. It's not so important these days, of course, but in the days when long distance was real expensive, and you make a long distance call and you talk for 15 minutes, and maybe in 5 or 10 minutes you had all your business taken care of, then you don't know how to get off. And so you wander around for a while. Well, same thing can happen here. If you don't know how you're going to exit, you'll start wandering around and then wind up, well, I guess that's about all I have here. But you want to finish with a bang and emphasize your important points and then stop. Another thing that you like to do, we like to see you do in the conclusion, and this will follow through on some of the other speeches as well, but a lot of times we'll set up a little bit of a mystery or a question or something in the introduction, start a story but not finish it in some of the cases, finish it in the conclusion, tie it back to the big idea that you started out with. You know, the obvious deal here with the learning a lesson is that, you know, my mother warned me not to do this. Well, in the conclusion, well, I should have listened to my mother. That brings those 2 ideas together. People like circular, you know, completing the idea. It's psychologically satisfying for them to have that. Oh, and then at the very thing at the very end, here's your wind-up, so you can go right into that. Everybody with every presentation should always say, are there any questions? At that point, the timer will stop. We'll know that that's the end of your actual formal presentation. So you can take as much time as I'll allow on the questions, and I'll probably let that run indefinitely because the class is small. As long as there's questions, we'll just go with them. So that very definitely gives you something to say at the end. So you say, well, are there any questions? And then field your questions. And with questions, not so important again with this. Well, with the audience, by the way, don't get real personal. You know, don't wind up with something, you know, answer. They maybe talk about pregnancy or something. Well, so did you have an abortion or what? That's too personal. That's, if they want you to know that, they'll tell you that. If they didn't tell you that, don't ask questions that get real personal. Obviously, if they give a real personal speech, there's some things that would make sense that you could ask, but try to use your judgment on that as an audience. As a speaker, when there's a question, if a question's asked and you don't have the answer for it, don't make it up. Because sure as heck, if you do, someone in the audience will know the real answer. And it would be very embarrassing. It's just good to be honest all the time for a lot of reasons, and that's one of them. So don't make up your answers. And sometimes also in the audience, you'll know someone has some expertise in that area. It's okay to say, John, what are your thoughts on that? And let them take it. Or always it's okay to say, I need to check that out and I'll get back to you. Notes. I'm going to send you, I think I did already actually send you a form with the notes for your notes, and that you can do on a computer and print out. And it'll take a sheet of paper and fold it like this. I think we talked about it already. And then your notes will be, actually, let me fold it this way for you guys. Your notes will be run this way. So this is portrait, not landscape, or in this case landscape, but portrait. And just a few words. You don't even need to run all the way across the line. You need to leave some white space in between so that you can find your place easily. And don't clutter them. Don't work your notes over. When you rehearse, make notes on your notes and then redo them so they're neat. Go ahead and write on them while you're rehearsing, but then come back to them and clean them up and retype them and print them again. Leave enough white space so you can find your place. I got landscape mode on here, but that's not what to do, it's what not to do. I would underline that and say we're in landscape mode. I'll say they're not brief. People get so many notes, they can't find their place in them and they wind up reading them for sure. Don't use both sides of a card, because if you ever pick it up, you'll have people trying to read the other side of it. And you don't want to pick up your notes anyway, because you start doing something like this. So leave it laying down and stand over here to the side and glance down, and the font will be big enough. In fact, I gave you a font with that example with some ideas about how notes go, and you just replace those words with your own words and go from there. So it'll kind of give you some hints as to what to do. Finally, what we ask for is that the story has I put here a moral or a point. Really a better word for you to use is a lesson I learned from this. Moral sounds kind of heavy-handed, but make it clear what we can learn from the experience. And I know we're not looking for anything earth-shattering here, but to have some point to it, not just to wander through a description of something and stop there. Have a point to the story. Generalize it so it applies to the audience. I learned from older adults that they have a lot of wisdom that I haven't acquired yet. If you have multiple lessons, start with the particular, like my story of the getting ill on that ride. I learned I shouldn't take a ride in a carnival with a full stomach, a stomach full of greasy food. But more importantly, I learned that I should listen to my mother about things, and more generally yet, I should listen to anybody that has more experience than I do. So build up to the most important one. Questions about this forum?
Yeah, well, I was wondering, or thinking, I can't talk, but anyways, say for instance, you're in the middle of saying your speech, and all of a sudden you got this itch on your ear, and I can't. I'm just saying, because I don't want somebody to think I'm, because I itch a lot on my ears.
Okay. And do you do that more when you're anxious, or?
No, it's just.
It has an
yeah,
itch.
it's I have some. When I get ear infection, it hurt or itches a lot.
Okay.
I'm just getting over that.
Right. Yeah. Well, if that occurs, it's just something that you'll have to deal with. Obviously, I don't want you to get focused on your itchy ear and not touching it.
Yeah.
Then you're going to lose your place and everything. Like sometimes you just have to deal with things like that.
Well, I was wondering if I could say in my speech, well, just give me a second because my ear is itching. I need to.
That would be appropriate.
Okay.
Yes. Excuse me a second. I had a problem with my ear here, and I've got a little itch, and apparently, I didn't see the video of it, but the person who delivered the Republican response to the State of the Union, the description was he did something like this. He had water sitting down too low. It wasn't handy for him. And he got thirsty. He's got a dry throat, which can happen when you're giving a longer talk like that. And he tried to pretend like, you know, he keeps his eye on the camera. And he was down like this, and then he comes up with this bottle of water and takes a drink. You can blame the folks that set his podium up for him and everything for that. He should have had it right here, and he just takes a sip and puts it back down. And so better off just to acknowledge that there's a problem. So if that happens, just acknowledge you're having a problem and deal with it.
Okay.
The audience is very understanding of that, and more so if you explain it than if you make them wonder what in the heck is going on now. You know? Any other things that I need to clear up here?
Pretty explanatory.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll cut the video here then, if you would. Got my cameraman.
Sweet.
Just hit the